My name is Jenna Carlisle. I am 25 years old, and what I'm about to tell you is something I never thought I would survive. If you really want to know how it all happened, then stay with me till the very end because my story will leave you speechless. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe, and remember, this story is written and edited by Dark Lifeside Diaries. It started on a cold autumn evening in my small town in Ohio. The kind of evening where the air is so sharp it feels like needles against your skin, where the wind carries the smell of damp leaves and smoke from fireplaces, where the shadows stretch just a little too long across the pavement. I had always thought of myself as cautious, the kind of girl who locked her doors twice and never trusted strangers easily, but nothing, absolutely nothing could have prepared me for the nightmare that unfolded when I crossed paths with Officer Daniel Marks, the man everyone in town called a hero, the man who wore the uniform that was supposed to represent safety and justice. The first time I noticed something was wrong was subtle, so subtle that anyone else might have brushed it off. I had been walking home from my shift at the diner, the streets empty, my breath visible in the glow of the street lamps, when I saw a police cruiser parked at the corner, headlights off, engine idling. At first I thought it was normal, maybe he was on patrol, but as I passed I felt the weight of eyes on me, a gaze so heavy it prickled the back of my neck. I quickened my pace, hearing the crunch of my boots against the wet gravel, my pulse rising even though I told myself I was being paranoid. But when I turned down the next street, I heard the low hum of the cruiser following slowly behind me, its tires whispering over the asphalt, never speeding up, never passing, just crawling along like a predator stalking prey. I tried to study my breathing, convincing myself it was a coincidence, but deep down something in my gut screamed otherwise. I ducked into my building, locking the door behind me, but that night I couldn't sleep. Every sound, the groan of the old pipes, the creak of the wooden floorboards made me jolt awake, convinced that someone was watching me. Days passed, and I tried to shake the unease, but then it escalated. I began noticing his presence everywhere. Outside the diner, during my shifts, parked near the grocery store, when I went shopping, even driving slowly past my apartment late at night, his headlights cutting through my blinds like blades of light. At first I told myself maybe I was imagining it, maybe he just happened to be in the same places, but then one evening while closing up the diner, I walked out back to take the trash and found him standing there in the alley. No cruiser, no reason to be there, just standing in the shadows with his arms crossed. "Evening, Jenna," he said, his voice low and calm, but there was something in the way he said my name that made my blood run cold, like he had rehearsed it, like he savored the way it rolled off his tongue. I forced a polite smile, muttered a quick hello, and rushed past, but I could feel his eyes drilling into me as I walked away from that night. The line between coincidence and obsession was shattered. I started receiving strange phone calls, silence on the other end, just breathing. My mail was tampered with, my doormat moved, little things inside my apartment slightly out of place, as if someone had been inside while I was gone. Reported at once to the station, but the officer behind the desk only chuckled and said, "That's Daniel, he's one of our best, you must be mistaken." The way he dismissed me, the way the room suddenly felt colder, told me exactly what I didn't want to admit. They would never believe me, because who would believe a small-town waitress over a decorated police officer? Still, I tried to carry on, telling myself it would pass, until one night I came home to find a single Polaroid photo slipped under my door. It was me, taken from outside my window while I was sleeping. My heart dropped, my legs nearly gave out, and my hands shook so violently I almost dropped the picture, my own face vulnerable, unaware, frozen in a moment I should have been safe, captured by someone who wanted me to know just how powerless I was. That was the moment I realized I wasn't just being followed, I was being hunted. The dread clung to me like a second skin, every step I took echoing with paranoia, every shadow hiding his presence. I started noticing the scent of his cologne lingering in the stairwell. The faintest trace of his leather gloves on my doorknob nights became unbearable, filled with the sound of footsteps that weren't mine, whispers that seemed to rise from the walls themselves, and the feeling, always the feeling of eyes on me, even in the darkest hours. Then came the night that shattered any illusion of safety I had left. It was past midnight, the rain beating against my windows in relentless waves, when I woke to a sound that made my blood curdle, the soft click of my apartment lock turning. I froze, heart hammering so loud I was sure it would give me away. The door creaked open, and through the crack I saw the silhouette of a man's step inside, tall, broad-shouldered, the faint gleam of a police badge catching the moonlight. It was him, Officer Daniel Marks. My body screamed to move, to run, but I was paralyzed, watching as he slowly closed the door behind him, his boots leaving wet prints Across my floor, he moved with terrifying calm, as though he had done this before, as though he knew every inch of my apartment. I clutched my phone in trembling hands, but before I could dial, his voice cut through the darkness. "You can't hide from me, Jenna." The way he said it, casual, almost playful, was more terrifying than if he had shouted. I scrambled to the bathroom, locking the door, pressing my back against the cold tile as tears blurred my vision. My fingers flew across my phone screen, but the call wouldn't go through. No signal, as if the storm outside had severed my only lifeline. Then silence. No footsteps, no breathing, nothing. Just silence so heavy it pressed against my eardrums. I held my breath, straining to hear when. Suddenly, bang, the bathroom door shook violently, splintering at the hinges. I screamed, clutching the phone to my chest, knowing in that moment that I was truly alone, trapped, and that the man who was supposed to protect people had turned into the monster hunting me. And just when I thought the door would give way, the noise stopped. Silence again. Then his whisper, so close to the crack of the door. I could feel the vibration of his breath. "This isn't over." My heart felt like it had stopped. I didn't move, didn't breathe, until eventually the sound of his boots faded. The front door clicked shut, and I was left in the suffocating dark, trembling and broken. I didn't sleep that night. I didn't sleep for many nights after, and from that moment forward, I knew I was living on borrowed time, and if I didn't find a way to stop him, he would finish what he started. After that night, the world I thought I knew crumbled into a twisted labyrinth of fear, lies, and betrayal, and every second that passed reminded me that I was being watched by a man who could walk through walls of justice without ever being questioned, a man who wore the uniform of safety but carried the heart of a predator. And no matter how much I tried to convince myself I could go on living normally, I knew deep down that every breath I took was measured by his desire to break me. The very next morning, I dragged myself to the police station, still trembling, my face pale, my voice breaking, as I told the officer at the desk what had happened, that Daniel Marks had broken into my apartment, that he was stalking me, that he was dangerous. But instead of concern, all I saw was the dismissive smirk of a man who clearly didn't want trouble. "Are you sure you weren't dreaming?" he asked, scribbling half-heartedly in his notebook, his tone dripping with condescension. "Daniel's been with us for years. He's a decorated officer. If you're making accusations, you'd better have proof." Proof, that word hit me like a slap across the face, because of course I didn't have proof. He was careful, calculated, never leaving behind anything that could be used against him. And in that moment, surrounded by the sterile smell of paper and coffee, I realized something far more terrifying than Daniel himself. The system was on his side. I left the station with tears burning my eyes, the weight of betrayal heavier than any fear I had ever felt before. I couldn't trust the police. I couldn't trust anyone that night. I pushed my dresser against my door, slept with a kitchen knife under my pillow, but even then my dreams were invaded by the sound of his whisper. "This isn't over," and every time I woke drenched in sweat, I swore I could smell his cologne lingering in the air, like he had been there watching. Days turned into weeks, and I became a prisoner of my own paranoia, jumping at shadows, barely eating, barely sleeping, but I knew I couldn't live like this forever. I needed answers. I needed to know who Daniel really was, so I started digging quietly, carefully, hoping I could find something, anything that would expose him. I searched public records, scrolled through old newspapers at the library, asked subtle questions around town. Most people praised him, called him a hero, but there were whispers, too, whispers of women who had left town suddenly, of incidents swept under the rug, of complaints that mysteriously disappeared from the record. One woman, former bartender who used to live a few streets from me, was said to have accused him of harassment before she vanished without a trace. I followed every thread, every rumor, until finally I found her sister, a woman named Michelle, who lived in a whole neighboring county. When I told her who I was and what had happened, the silence on the other end of the phone spoke louder than any words. "You need to get out," she said finally, her voice trembling. "He won't stop. He didn't stop with my sister, and he won't stop with you." Her words carved into me like ice, but they also ignited something else, rage. If he had done this before, if he had destroyed lives and walked away clean, then I couldn't just run. I had to fight back. Still fighting back against a police officer. Was suicide. He had the badge, the gun, the power. I was just a waitress with a shaky voice and sleepless eyes. But sometimes desperation breeds courage, and mine began the night I found another Polaroid under my door, this time of me in the shower. My body blurred by steam, but my fear captured perfectly in the tilt of my head and the way my hand was pressed to the glass. I collapsed on the bathroom floor, clutching the photo, sobbing until my throat was raw, but when the tears dried, something hardened inside me. No more running, no more begging for help that would never come. I was going to gather my own proof piece by piece, and when the time was right, I would expose him. I started small, leaving my phone recording by the window at night, setting up a cheap camera hidden in the corner of my living room. The first nights yielded nothing but static, but then one stormy night the footage came back with a shadow moving outside my window, pausing, watching the faint glint of a badge catching the lightning for a fraction of a second. My hands shook as I replayed it over and over. It wasn't enough to take to the police, but it was enough for me to know I wasn't insane. He was there. He was always there. As the weeks passed, the game between us escalated. He began leaving small tokens in places he knew I'd find them. One of his gloves tucked under my pillow, a cigarette butt with his lipstick-stained fingerprint on my balcony, even a single bullet resting on my kitchen counter with my name scratched into the casing. He wanted me to know he could end me at any time. He wanted me to feel the weight of his control, but what he didn't know was that every gift he left became another piece of evidence in the collection I was secretly building. Still living in this constant state of war tore at my sanity. My friends stopped visiting, whispering behind my back that I was losing it. My boss threatened to cut my hours because I was always distracted, and worst of all, my own mother, sweet trusting, called to tell me she had spoken with Officer Marks after church, and he told her I was going through a rough patch and imagining things. Hearing her defend him nearly broke me because it showed me just how deep his manipulation ran. He wasn't just isolating me, he was painting me as unstable to everyone around me so that when the time came, no one would believe a word I said. But betrayal breeds fury, and that fury kept me alive, kept me plotting, even when despair clawed at my chest. One evening as I walked home, I felt the hairs on my neck rise. I turned and saw him leaning against his cruiser across the street, his arms crossed, his smile small but venomous. Evening, Jenna, he called, mocking the memory of the first time he had cornered me. My fist clenched, my heart raced, but instead of running, I stared back. I wanted him to know I wasn't broken, not yet. His smile widened, and he tapped 2 fingers to his temple like he was inside my head, then got into his car and drove off. That night, I sat by my window watching the rain streak down the glass, and I knew without a shadow of doubt this would end one of 2 ways. Either he destroyed me or I destroyed him, and in that dark reflection of myself in the glass, I whispered a vow, I'll make you pay. But even as I said it, a part of me trembled because I knew vengeance came with a cost, and the cost might be my life. Still, I began to plan. I researched hidden cameras, voice recorders, even ways to trace calls. I started carrying pepper spray, a small blade tucked into my purse. I rehearsed in my mind what I would do if he came for me again, but no amount of preparation could have braced me for what happened next. One evening as I returned to my apartment, I unlocked the door and froze. The air smelled different, sharp, metallic, like blood, slowly, heart hammering. I pushed the door open and stepped inside. The lights flickered, and there, lying in the middle of my living room, was another Polaroid. My hand shook as I picked it up, my breath catching in my throat. It was me sleeping again, but this time in the photo there was a shadow standing over me, a shadow that looked exactly like him. My stomach twisted, my vision blurred, and I staggered back because the implication was clear. He wasn't just watching anymore, he was inside. While I was unconscious, he was already closer than I could bear. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat in the corner of my room, clutching the knife, every creak of the building like a countdown to my doom, and as the first light of dawn bled through the blinds, I realized something terrifying yet undeniable. The time for waiting was over. If I didn't strike back soon, there wouldn't be a chance. Left to the morning after I found that Polaroid with his shadow looming over me, something inside me finally snapped, not in the way that breaks you completely, but in the way that reshapes you into something harder, sharper, more dangerous, because I knew if I let the fear keep controlling me, I would end up another missing woman. Another whispered rumor swept under the rug, and Daniel Marks would smile in his uniform at my funeral while everyone praised him for trying to help me. So instead of collapsing, I decided that from this moment forward, I was going to fight back with everything I had, and if that meant becoming someone I didn't recognize, then so be it. The first thing I did was move my mattress into the living room, directly beneath the camera I had hidden in the corner, because if he was coming into my bedroom while I slept, then I would change the battlefield, and this time I would be ready. I slept with my clothes on, knife and my hand recorder running on my phone, every nerve in my body vibrating with tension, and though I didn't catch him that night, the sense of control I felt, even small, even temporary, gave me a sliver of hope. But Daniel wasn't the kind of man who let his prey feel safe for long. 2 days later, I came home from work to find my apartment door slightly ajar, the chain lock dangling uselessly, and my stomach plummeted as I realized he'd been inside again. And when I pushed the door open, the sight that greeted me nearly made me scream. Written across my bathroom mirror in bold red letters was the phrase "TikTok Jenna." Smeared in something that looked disturbingly like blood though when I touched it with a trembling finger. I realized it was red lipstick. His way of mocking me, reminding me he could invade not only my home but my sanity. I took photos, saved the lipstick tissue. I found crumpled in the sink and stored them with my growing box of evidence, but my hands shook violently as I did it because no matter how many trophies of his obsession I collected, none of it would matter if I didn't survive long enough to use them. That night, Michelle, the sister of the bartender who had vanished, called me again, her voice shaking, and confessed that her sister had once told her Daniel would play games with her too, leaving messages standing in the dark corners of her apartment, making her feel insane before she disappeared. "He won't stop until you're gone too," Michelle whispered, and though the fear in her voice chilled me, it also fueled me because if this monster had taken her sister, then maybe, just maybe I could be the one to stop him. So I escalated my plan. I ordered better equipment online, 2 hidden cameras disguised as smoke detectors, a GPS tracker small enough to slip under his cruiser if I ever got the chance, and a motion-activated recorder I placed near my door. I told no one, not even my closest friend at the diner, because I couldn't risk anyone warning him or doubting me, but secrecy came with loneliness, and loneliness breeds despair, and there were nights I found myself curled in the corner, sobbing silently, praying to a God I wasn't even sure listened anymore, begging for strength to keep going. And yet every tear I shed seemed to be matched by another twisted move from Daniel. One night, I returned home to find a stuffed animal sitting on my bed, a small bear torn at the seams, its button eyes ripped out, a knife stabbed through its chest, with a note pinned to it that read, "Sweet dreams." I screamed until my throat was raw, then collapsed on the floor, trembling, staring at the grotesque gift until the rage inside me boiled over because he wanted me to break, to be too terrified to fight, and I swore I would never give him that satisfaction. Instead, I bagged the bear, preserved it carefully with gloves, and added it to my evidence box. But paranoia is a cruel companion, and soon I began seeing him even when he wasn't there. His reflection in store windows, his shadow stretching across alleys, his silhouette in passing cars, and every time I blinked I wondered if my mind was fracturing or if he truly was everywhere, omnipresent and inescapable. And then came the night that changed everything. I was walking home from the diner after a late shift, the streets eerily quiet, when I heard footsteps behind me. Steady, heavy, matching mine perfectly, my chest tight, my palms slick with sweat, and I quickened my pace, darting into a side alley, hoping to shake whoever was following me, but the footsteps quickened too, growing louder, closer, until I spun around with my knife in hand, ready to fight, and nearly collapsed when I saw it was Daniel himself, not in uniform this time, but in dark clothes, his eyes glinting with amusement under the weak glow of a street lamp. "Scared, Jenna?" he asked softly, stepping closer, the smile on his face cruel and deliberate. My hand trembled on the knife, but I forced myself to hold it steady, my voice shaking as I whispered, "Stay away from me." He tilted his head, mocking me, then stepped even closer until the cold metal of my blade pressed against his chest. "Go ahead," he murmured. "Do it. See what happens when you stab a police officer. No one will believe you. No one will save you." His words cut deeper than any blade because I knew he was right, and in that moment, standing under the flickering light, I realized he wasn't just threatening me, he was daring me, inviting me to fall into his trap. With a shaky breath, I lowered the knife, my stomach twisting in defeat, and his grin widened, victorious, before he leaned close enough for me to smell the smoke and mother on his jacket, and whispered, "You belong to me now." Then he turned and walked away, leaving me trembling, humiliated, and angrier than I had ever been in my life. That night, I broke down completely, sobbing into my pillow, but through the sobs came clarity. He wanted me powerless, but I would use his arrogance against him. If he believed no one would ever believe me, then I would gather so much evidence, so much undeniable proof that not even his badge could shield him. And so I began my most dangerous move yet. The next evening, I dressed casually, grabbed my purse, and waited until I saw his cruiser parked near the diner. My heart hammered as I walked past it, casually dropping my keys as a cover, and in one swift motion I crouched, pressed the tiny GPS tracker beneath the wheel well, and stood before he could notice. I walked away, breath shallow, sweat dripping down my spine, but when I checked my phone later and saw his car blinking on the map, a rush of adrenaline surged through me. For the first time, I could track him. For the first time, I had the upper hand over the next week. I monitored his movements, logging where he went, how often he circled my apartment, how long he lingered outside the diner, and then one night I saw something on the tracker that froze my blood. his cruiser parked outside my mother's house across town. Panic ripped through me because until that moment, I had believed this war was only between us, but now he was dragging my family into it, threatening. The only person I loved more than my own life, I called her frantically, voice shaking, begging her to lock the doors, but she laughed softly, telling me Daniel had just stopped by to check in on her and that he seemed so kind, so concerned about me. And in that instant, I realized the depth of his manipulation. He was weaving his way into her trust, preparing to use her as another weapon against me. The fury in my chest burned hotter than fire, but alongside it was a bone-deep terror because if he could charm her, if he could step so easily into her world, then no one was safe. I drove to her house that night, tears blurring my vision, rehearsing how I would explain how I would protect her, but when I pulled up, her porch light was off, her front door ajar, and my heart nearly stopped as I stumbled inside, calling her name. The living room was empty, eerily silent, but on the kitchen counter lay another Polaroid, this one showing my mother sitting calmly in her armchair, smiling completely unaware of the shadowy figure standing behind her with a hand on her shoulder. Daniel. My scream echoed through the house as the photo slipped from my trembling fingers, and in that moment I knew the game had changed. He wasn't just coming for me anymore, he was coming for everyone I loved. The night in the small rain-soaked town was heavier than usual, as if the air itself was bloated with secrets no one wanted to speak, and Jenna Carlisle, the young woman whose death had been dismissed as a mere tragedy in the line of duty, had become something much darker than a rumor whispered by nervous colleagues. She'd become a storm that had learned to take shape, and tonight she was coming for closure, vengeance, and revelation all at once, a tangled web of justice that blurred the lines between good and evil until even the most self-righteous man questioned his own morality. And as the clock in the precinct tower struck midnight, a low hum filled the corridors of the police station where her former brothers in blue gathered, their laughter strained and hollow, trying to wash away the guilt of their silence with cheap whiskey. But the flickering lights above them betrayed their pretense, each ball buzzing as if aware of the spirit circling just beyond the reach of their mortal vision. And then the door at the far end creaked open by itself, slow and deliberate, spilling a gush of cold air into the room, sending cigarette smoke twisting into grotesque shapes that made one officer cough in terror before whispering Jenna's name under his breath. And as if summoned by his voice, her figure bled through the shadows, her eyes twin shards of broken glass reflecting the pain of betrayal and the fury of injustice. Her once beautiful face torn between humanity and decay, a ghastly reminder of the night they left her to die, when the operation went wrong, when backup was deliberately delayed, so the drug lord she was investigating could take her out of the picture without consequence. And now those same men who had laughed at her funeral patted each other on the back and promoted themselves with medals pinned to hollow chests, found their throats tightening as she stepped closer, her boots echoing against the tiled floor with a sound too heavy for something not entirely of this world. And with every step she took, memories flooded their minds. The night of her murder, the way she screamed over the radio for help, the way one officer had switched off the channel to avoid hearing her plead the way another had burned the evidence that would have cleared her name, and the way the chief himself had signed her death warrant with nothing but a smirk, saying she was getting in too deep. And now here she was, her uniform torn but glowing faintly as if woven from grief itself, her badge pinned to her chest like a scarlet letter of condemnation. And as the officers stumbled backward, chairs clattering, one tried to draw his gun but found the weapon rusted and crumbling in his hand, a mockery of protection, while another tried to run, but the door slammed shut with such force the glass shattered outward, shards embedding in his flesh like nature itself had turned against him. And Jenna spoke at last, her voice layered with echoes of the woman she had been and the creature she had become, accusing them one by one, reminding them of their cowardice, their greed, their betrayal. And as she named each sin, the building itself seemed to react, the walls groaning like bones under pressure, the floor cracking to reveal a darkness pulsing beneath. And one officer, shaking uncontrollably, confessed through tears, begging forgiveness. But Jenna's hollow stare never softened, because forgiveness was no longer part of her vocabulary, only reckoning. And she reached for him, her hand phasing through his chest, gripping his heart with such icy fury that his scream carried out into the night before he collapsed, eyes wide open, dead from terror and truth alike. And the others shrieked, some cursing her, some praying, some falling to their knees. But Jenna only grew taller, stronger, her form feeding on their fear, her body no longer confined to human proportions, her hair whipping around her like smoke from a burning pyre, and when the chief tried to bargain, claiming he had no choice that politics forced his hand, Jenna tilted her head and reminded him of the night he had promised her safety, of the way she had looked up to him as a mentor, a father figure, and then spat on the memory by selling her out to criminals, and with one violent motion, she slammed him against the wall, his bones cracking, his eyes bulging, his pleas thrill, but she leaned in close, whispering a single phrase: "I trusted you," before tearing his soul free from his body in a flash of light that left the others momentarily blind, and when their sight returned, the chief's body was nothing but a husk, shriveled and lifeless, slumped in a pool of blackened blood, and the precinct sirens wailed even though no one had touched them, echoing across the town as if alerting the world that justice had taken a new form, and one by one the officers fell, each punished in a way tailored to their sins, their screams weaving together like a macabre symphony, until silence finally reclaimed the station, broken only by the steady dripping of blood from the ceiling. And Jenna, now standing in the center of the carnage, looked down at what remained of the men who betrayed her, breathing, slowing, her expression unreadable, and for a moment it seemed as though she might finally rest, that her vengeance had been completed. But then her gaze shifted to the night beyond the shattered windows, to the town that had turned a blind eye, to the politicians who had profited from her death, to the criminals who had laughed at her grave, and a cruel smile curved her lips, because Jenna Carlisle's revenge had only just begun. And as the rain poured harder, she stepped through the broken glass and vanished into the storm, leaving behind nothing but corpses, whispers, and the promise that the badge she once wore in honor would now serve as her curse upon all who thought justice could be buried with her bones.